Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be the mid-year book freakout tag. I love doing this tag every single year as a kind of checkup to see how my reading year is going so far and maybe things that I want to implement in the second half of the year. So before I get started, the original creator of this, as far as I could see, is a creator called Earl Grey Books. I will leave their information in the description bar down below. Let's just go ahead and get started. The first question is, how is your reading year going? And I think it's going pretty well. I'm also going to talk about some stats here, just because I feel like this section of the tag is a great way to kind of look at some numbers behind my assessment that I feel like my reading year is going, and these numbers I feel kind of back that up. So currently, as I'm filming this tag, I have read 103 books, and that is 34,595 pages. That's a little more than I typically read toward the midpoint of the year. Usually my story graph goal is 150 books, and I usually hit that with a couple to spare, but I feel like at this point, midway through the year, 103 books, I might hit 200 this year. I don't know. A lot of my most anticipated for the second half of the year are very chunky books, so if we focus on those, probably not so much. As you can also see from this graphic, the average amount of time it takes me to read a book is 4 days. That's probably close to accurate. I'm not the best at immediately when I finish a book tracking it in Storygraph, marking it as read, so I don't know how accurate, but that feels like a pretty good bench point. And then my top moods, of course, with my favorite genres, it makes sense that the top ones are dark and mysterious and also tense. As for what the 103 books look like, most of them have been in the 300 to 499 page range. About 57% of the books that I've read have fit in there. 6% have been over 500 pages, and then 37% have been less than 300 pages. And I've really gotten into novellas this year, and short form, especially horror, has really been wowing me this year. So I think that under 300 is a little bit higher than it normally would be, which is interesting to see. And then the genre breakdown of fiction versus nonfiction, we have fiction at 96%, nonfiction at 4%. I would like to bump the nonfiction up a little bit. I'd like to be reading maybe 1 or 2 nonfiction books a month. I haven't done that in the first half of the year, maybe a goal for the second half of the year, but that is a typical looking sort of pie for me in terms of fiction versus nonfiction. In terms of genres, this has been a very horror-filled year for me. My top genre is horror, and I've read 65 books that are genre tagged as horror, and then thriller, fantasy, LGBTQIA+, and literary fiction are the other top 5 genres that I've read so far this year. And then the last stat that I have to share with y'all today are my most read authors. I do have a number of repeat authors, and the top author is Stephen Graham Jones, and then Joanna Van Veen, Richard Chismar, and Rachel Harrison. And I wanted to include this one on here because the 2 top authors, Stephen Graham Jones and Joanna Van Veen, they appear a lot in this tag, so I thought it was cool that they showed up for most read authors. So now that we've talked stats some, let's get into these individual questions. The second question in this tag is the best book that you've read so far this year, and that for me would be Blood on Her Tongue by Joanna Van Veen. I'm in love with this book. I read it as an ARC and immediately knew that I had to get my hands on a copy of this one because I just fell in love with this vampiric, sapphic vampire story. This takes place in the Netherlands in the 1880s, and we are following twin sisters Lucy and Sarah. And Lucy is going to the aid of her sister Sarah, who has just become so incredibly ill, and fearing that the end is near, Lucy comes to be kind of a nurse and also help her sister through this sickness. When she arrives at her sister and her sister's husband's estate, she starts getting all all of the details of everything that happened to lead her sister to becoming sick, and then the very strange symptoms that her sister is displaying. And as soon as she goes to help Sarah, Sarah tells Lucy, "You gotta leave, she is after me." And all of this has to deal with a bog body that Sarah found on the estate right before she fell ill. So I really loved this one. There's a little bit of epistolary format in here with letters from the sisters to and from each other, and then it just also the way that this explores Gothic tropes, Gothic themes, and really invigorates them, and the character work, these sister relationships and dynamics in here, all of the character relationships are so messy, and this is just such a delightfully gory vampire novel that has a lot of little twists and turns that reinvent the lore a little bit while also sticking true to Gothic conventions that I think a lot of vampire fans really love. So without a doubt, this is my favorite book of the year so far. The next question is the best sequel that you've read so far this year, and that for me would actually be the most recent book that I've read this year, The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the third and final book in the Indian Lake trilogy, where we're following Jade Daniels. She is now forever one of my favorite final girls. The character study from book 1 to book 3 is incredible. This series has heart. This series also has a lot of gore, a lot of scares, a lot of nods to classic slasher and horror movies while still capturing like a brand new story, making it feel very fresh, very unique. And this series was one where the books just kept getting better, and this conclusion just really nailed the landing for this trilogy. So without a doubt, this is the best sequel that I've read this year. The next question is favorite reread, and unfortunately this is an answer that was super easy as well. I have not reread anything at this point in the year, so definitely want to change that in the second half of the year, but yeah, nothing. I haven't reread anything this year. The next question is, what is the genre that you've been reading / loving the most? And that I touched upon it in my stats at the beginning of this video, horror. It has been such a horror heavy year for me. I think I do want to try and read some more fantasy. The fantasy books that I've been reading have been thicker and bigger on average, so that is why horror has definitely edged its way to the top. Yeah, when we looked at those stats at the beginning of this video, definitely no contest this year. I've definitely been reading the most horror. The next question is, what are some new releases that you haven't read yet that you want to? And I've got lots. I've got so many, but just a couple on the top of my priority list. I would love to pick up The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is a horror fantasy, first in a series. I've never read anything by Abercrombie, but I have heard that this is a pretty good place to start, so I am intrigued by this one, would love to get to it. And then also I have kind of in the medieval realm, because that one is like a medieval horror fantasy. The next one I have is medieval horror from an author that I have read from before and really loved, and that would be The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. I would love to get to this one soon. I need to prioritize it. And then last but not least for this question, we have Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker. I actually got this beautiful, beautiful version in January, and I intended to read it pretty soon after I got it, but the events of this book take place primarily during the Hungry Ghost Festival, which is at the end of July, beginning of August, depending on the year. So I did hold off on this one. I wanted to wait and read it during the summer, so that's coming up soon. Definitely need to get around to this one, but those are three pretty high priority books for me to finish by the end of the year. The next question is, what are some of your most anticipated releases for the second half of the year? And the first one is Catabasis or Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. This is a journey into the underworld following Dante's 9 Circles of Hell. R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite authors of all time, so her books I think are always pretty much the answer for this question in this tag, but I'm really excited for this one. I love the idea, and I just love hearing her talk about this one and her inspirations and what classic works that she used to help inspire her. So I think I'm really going to love this one. And then another one I cannot wait for is King Sorrow by Joe Hill, which is supposed to be like an 800-page horror fantasy fantasy epic with Arthurian legend. So all of those super big buzzwords for me. It's been a while since we've gotten a Joe Hill novel, and especially such a chunky one. So definitely looking forward to those two. The next question is, what are some of your biggest disappointments of the year? And I'll go through these quickly because I don't like to harp on the negatives, but for me, The Lamb by Lucy Rose, by no means was this a bad book, but so many people are loving this one, and I wanted to love this one with the same intensity that others have, and it just turned out being okay for me. I wished it would have been a novella. I thought it would have been like punchier and delivered its themes just a little bit more effectively in that format. So that's number one. And then number two is actually Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. I had a lot of issues with this one. I have a whole vlog reading witchy horror, and I talk in depth about a lot of the issues that I have with it. I really, this one out of the two that I'm talking about, I was more disappointed by because Grady Hendrix was an auto-read author, auto-buy author. I actually bought this book and I ended up reselling it because I didn't want it on my shelves because I was really disappointed and I hated a lot of it. So unfortunately, that's the biggest disappointment for me so far, but we are moving into kind of more positive territory. The next question is, what are some of your biggest surprises? And that for me, number one would be Devil House by John Darnielle, just because this one has one of the lowest average Storygraph ratings that I have ever seen, and I ended up really loving this one. It has such an unconventional storytelling format, and I think some of the way in which it is written and the book that it turns out to be is not the book that we are expecting when we read the blurb and when we even read the first section of this one. I think it's kind of meta in its intentionality, and that's part of the critique that it is implementing about true crime and following crime fiction, crime nonfiction, and I thought it was just really fascinating, the conversations about storytelling and other people's narratives and an author's allowance to be able to use other people's stories or even other people's anecdotes in their fiction writing. So I really loved this one, but it's definitely not a book for everyone because it has such a low average rating. And then also I have Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin. This is a vampire book that came out in the 1980s before Game of Thrones. I did not even know that George R.R. Martin had written a vampire novel before researching and picking this up for a vlog. It takes place in post-Civil War America, right during the antebellum period, and it follows a steamboat captain and gets super into steamboat culture and river culture and boating culture, and none of that sounds exciting on paper, but I was so locked in and immersed in this world that George R.R. Martin created, and the vampires were very traditional, but they still had some twists on their lore, and I thought the way that the vampires and the boating industry really combined in this story was so fascinating, and I had no idea this book existed before this year. Read it, really loved it, glad to have read it. Next question is, who is your favorite newest author? And that can be a debut author or a new to you author. It has to be Joanna Van Veen for me because I read both of her books this year, fell in love with them. Blood on Her Tongue right over here is my favorite of the year so far. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to Stephen Graham Jones because while I did know of him before this year and I had read his books before this year, he is my most read author of the year, and he has just been coming out with hit after hit after hit for me, so that I know that he is now like one of my favorite authors of all time probably. And same with Joanna Van Veen. I've read both of her books this year and really loved both of them, so now they are both authors that I eagerly anticipate whatever they come out with next. The next question is, who is your newest favorite character? And like most of these questions, I do have a couple of answers. I mean, I've read over 100 books so far this year. It's hard to narrow it down to just one, but the first character would be John from The Pretender by Jo Harkin. This is an interesting one because it's definitely a character study, and this is a historical fiction about a young boy who is raised to become the next king of England, but he's actually a pretender to the throne, and this book follows him through so many different name changes and different identity changes, and the way that that is done and explored board, and he just feels, I mean, he was a real person. He is based off of a real character from Tudor era England history, but he's most often known as just a footnote in history books. So it was really nice to just get him fully fleshed out and really be able to kind of see such a unique perspective from both the commoner side of the era and then the nobility side. I just loved what this author did with the characterization in here of not just John, but a lot of the different characters. Joe Harkin really brought this character to life for me. And then the second answer would have to be Dr. Walden from The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. I just loved Dr. Walden just in general, but she was such a fun main character to follow, an expert in her field. This is a book that I cannot recommend enough because it is a magical dark academia where we are following a professor. Normally in these types of situations, we're following students, so it was really cool to kind of get that different aspect and follow someone who isn't learning magic, but maybe learning different things that magic can do. She's an expert in her field. She's got a good head on her shoulders, and I also really enjoyed following her character journey throughout this book. Absolutely loved it. Next question is, what is a book that made you cry? And that would be When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. Nat Cassidy is now 3 for 3 of his novels. His novella is fun, but the 3 novels, Mary, Nestlings, and When the Wolf Comes Home, I've cried at all of them. And this one really got to me because I didn't cry until the author's note at the end of this one. This book is about complex father relationships, and just the author's note at the end of this makes me really want to read a nonfiction book by Nat Cassidy. He has such interesting things to say, not only about his life, but just in general, like with horror fiction and how that impacts us and how we can use tropes like vampires and werewolves and demons and like all of that stuff to portray real life anxieties. I would love to read a nonfiction from him, but this one just ended in such a beautiful note. And then I did also shed some tears at the end of The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones as well. Next question is, what is a book that has made you happy? And that for me would have to be The Sky on Fire by Jen Lyons. This was such a fun time. If you like a dragon fantasy, you gotta check out this standalone. It's just such a fun quest sort of heist story, a ragtag group of people all teaming up together. They all have different motives, different reasons for wanting to do this heist, and of course as they're continuing along the heist, the relationships and the bond between them grow stronger. So dragons, found family, just lots of really lovely tropes that I love in a fantasy. I know a lot of other people do as well. This was fun, this was funny, and it just really invigorated my love for dragon fantasy and reminded me what I love about a fantasy story. So definitely The Sky on Fire is what comes to mind for this one, with a book that I was just having so much fun from beginning to end. Next question is, what is the most beautiful book that you've purchased this year? I'm so sorry, these are going to be repeats from other answers, but number 1 is Blood on Her Tongue. I love this style of cover, this style of artwork on the cover, and then this one of course also has the sprayed edges. The cover design for this book was by Erin Fitzsimmons over at Source Books. There are also cover images from the National Museum of Art of Romania. So I love the trend of, especially in horror, in gothic horror, of putting a traditional sort of artwork on the cover. I really love this. Love dogs. This is just such a striking cover to me. And then we also have, kind of in the same vein but a little bit more gory, The Starving Saints. I really love what this cover is doing. It's a medieval horror, so you want something that sort of evokes that on the cover with just like a medieval sort of artwork. And then this one I got from Aardvark, and it had a very cool naked hardback that is gold foiling with bees. And also, so we get some new books in here to talk about, let's shout out one more cover. That's Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I love this one as well. This is definitely a work of art that I believe is called The Nightmare, and I love it. Cover design is by Alicia Tatone, and the cover art is by Henry Fuseli, The Nightmare, 1781 oil on canvas. So I love this one. This is another gothic horror, another vampiric gothic horror, where I just feel like this artwork on the cover immediately captures a sense of exactly the vibes the book is trying to convey. I really love a cover that has a repurposed painting on it. And then the last question is, what books do you still need to read by the end of the year? And my answer always is just so many, but for some priority books, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab came out recently, and I have yet to read it, and I'm really dying to, so I would love to get to this one soon. And then also I would love to finally start my reread of the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. I've not been in a reread mood, but I do want to revisit this series. A little self-shame moment. I think I said this same exact thing in my mid-year book freakout tag of last year, that I want to reread this series, but I definitely do. So let's try and get that started second half of this year. Also, speaking of rereads, I would love to reread the Book of Dust series by Philip Pullman, book number 1, La Belle Sauvage, and then book number 2, The Secret Commonwealth, before the third and long awaited final book in the trilogy, The Rose Fields, comes out at the end of this year. So those are just some of the bookish plans. A lot of rereading. We'll see if I do better at that half 2 versus half 1 of the year. But thank you all so much for watching. This has been the mid-year book freakout tag. Let me know down below if you've done this. I would love to check out your tag. I love watching these videos. I get a lot of great recommendations from hearing about people's favorite characters and favorite books and surprising books of the year, so that's always fun. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!